In the mid-1950s, I was a 13, 14-year-old boy living in the Methow Valley, nestled up high in the eastern slopes of the Cascade Mountains, just a short hop over the Cascade crest, and we'd be in the coast country, in the high reservoirs of the Pacific Power and Light dams up in that region, Diablo Lake, and it was a different age, especially in the high mountain valleys of that country in the mid-1950s. We had no television. We had telephone, and no internet, of course. Long-distance calls were expensive. We were pretty isolated. We were at the end of a dead-end highway. North of our little community was another little outpost called Mazama, where a good family friend lived and had a guide and outfitting business. This would later lead to a great adventure for me with saddle horses, pack mules, chainsaws and axes and sleeping bags, and a summer spent clearing Forest Service trails. My mother was a clerk at the Winthrop Ranger Station, Forest Service, and she had bought for $5,000 a little frame house down on the Methow River on the south edge of town, in a little neighborhood locally referred to as Heckendorn, obviously from an old settler's name. It was a small two-story house. My bedroom was upstairs on one side of the stairway that came up between the rooms. And the other side, the other room, was a fairly deep room, and as I remember, was more of an attic storage area. Excuse me. Little cup of tea here. It wasn't a totally finished room, but the front end was finished, and my kid brother kept his cot in there. There was a window in my room facing the neighbor's house, just across the little picket fence. And my window looked into an upstairs window in the other little house. And I have some very sad memories of a Heckendorn girl about my age. The girl in the upstairs window. The light would come on in the evening, and she would appear and walk over and pull the shade on her window, and then I would see shadows, and she would walk to the other side of the room. And each evening, as I would sit at my desk doing my homework or reading a book, Heckendorn Girl and her shadow would appear on the blind. Her family was quite religious. They were members of a fairly small Christian sect, and they were pretty much apart from the rest of the community because of their strict religion and the group they belonged to. So I never had much of a chance to talk with her because we were living in different universes because of her family's religion and my rather carefree ways and my mother's rather free-ranging nature. We weren't bound to any strict religion. But from time to time I would see her, and especially on Sunday, the family would come out all dressed to the nines in their fancy Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, and she would be in her white starched dress with a full flowing skirt, her hands in white gloves clutching a prayer book or a Bible to her chest, and away they would go. And then they would come back, and sometimes they'd have a little picnic in the backyard, and I would peek over and watch. And then one day, we heard of a drowning. The small church group had gone to the head of the valley this one weekend and decided to have a church outing and a picnic. So they went up a side canyon where a whitewater stream flowed down through the boulders, and there was a Forest Service campground. And they were having a wonderful time, good food laid out on the tables and the children playing. And some of the young people discovered one of our large ponderosa pine trees had given way. The bank had been undercut, and the tree had fallen across the creek and made a natural bridge. It had been there for a long time, so the limbs had pretty much broken off, and the upper trunk was pretty much exposed. And some of the boys started daring each other to walk across the log and go across the creek, which was not uncommon for us youngsters to do, especially when we wanted to fish on the other side of the creek or go upstream. So the girls were watching, and our Heckendorn Girl decided she would join them, and she made it halfway across, and she lost her balance, and she fell in, and she was carried away in the rushing current. It was spring of the year, and the water was high. The snow melt was coming down through the drainages, and the white water was just roaring. So there was never any chance to save her or to recover her, and she was found downstream some distance, pounded by the rocks in the swift current. And the family was never the same again. And it wasn't long before they moved away, and the house was empty. No longer was there any light in the upstairs window, no shadow on the drawn window blind. And then a young couple, friends of my mother's, bought the place and moved in, and soon there was a crib in that room. And the shade pretty much always stayed up, and the young mother would come and lay the baby in the crib, and I would see her as I was sitting at my desk doing my homework. But now I'm in my 80s. Many decades later, and I still remember the tall, slender, dark-haired Heckendorn Girl in her Sunday dress, her white gloves, and her little prayer book clutched to her chest. And I guess she'll always live that way in my memories. Thank you.